It saddens me that I have to make this video, but if we want to create meaningful changes, then this had to be done. On this channel I educate consumers and developers with exclusive and accurate data on what graphical aspects are taking up your GPU performance, which allow consumers to criticize computations existing in their games. But I alternate from this topic to discuss the weakest links infecting the game industry. First it was flawed TA and the various effects that needlessly abuse it. Then it was nanite, then global illumination. Then GPU manufacturers along with a market incentive crisis. Today's industry weakest link is Digital Foundry. After we released our last analysis, I was made aware of a DF Weekly where the founder of Digital Foundry, Richard Ledbetter, shared a supporter question with John Linneman and Alex Battaglia asking how they felt about the video genre criticizing the underwhelming visual results of 9th gen graphics. This genre of course encompasses the videos this channel produces. I found the responses incredibly predictable and generic. Immediately, Richard began spewing rhetoric about the extraordinary things developers are trying to put in our games despite hardware limitations. What extraordinary things are devs trying to put in our games? Honestly, smeary lighting, noisy geometric detail, simulations that can be partially pre-computed, advanced anti-aliasing such as FSR2 according to Oliver Mackenzie, which has various quality issues including major blur in motion. To downplay the clear regressions we've seen, John follows up with some contrived comparison about how when we move to 3D graphics, many instances show the new gen being worse than the last gen. He then describes why we need to move to dynamic GI for dynamic games. That's true, but we've had partially dynamic GI during 8th gen with destructible and moving objects. These guys blindly defend slow lighting for the sake of dynamics because they are so conditioned by ray tracing culture, which John randomly mentions. He hyper-focused on the static nature of the Order 1886, when the static nature of that game is not because of the baked lighting like he and his colleagues assume. It's because it wasn't a priority for the developers to implement. We have a lot of systems that would easily allow a more dynamic environment for the Order 1886, but they continue to defend games that use lighting systems like Lumen that fall apart visually. After disclaiming that the right balance should be found for certain game scenarios, he then states that new visual features require sacrifices and that last gen sacrificed resolution and frame rate, but this gen uses upscaling instead. In other words, we're stagnating. People with sufficient hardware have to upscale from sub 1080p because of optimization issues, not because spectacular visuals are being computed, which is what Digital Foundry perpetuates. We know this for sure thanks to the proof shown on this channel. He then defended Avowed for being less graphically impressive than previous gen games because it's a cheaper production. His colleagues agree, proving how out of touch they are about the situation. In 2025, we should have more developer tools that promote optimized content. They don't understand that much of the blame goes on companies like Epic Games for exclusively investing in technologies that cater to fast development features that put optimization on the lowest priority. For instance, nanite. Consumers should not be complacent with a low-effort geo solution that can end up being 3 times slower and worse looking than optimized rendering. Educated developers don't want this either. Developers should have systems that convert these objects into high-quality consumer-efficient models with proper texture formats so that they can be combined for what should be standard texture illusions. But these guys praise nanite endlessly for combating popping and market it against the worst-case scenario, when anyone who watches this channel knows that persistence-based, well-timed order dither transitions would be far more optimized. Heck, I even had someone send me geomorphing footage in Rainbow Six Siege. The last thing I need to criticize John for is leaning into the monitor excuse. People with a 1080p screen can get less noisy and smeary results using resolution emulation, but the problem with that is the computational cost. 4K monitors force GPUs to brute force issues automatically, whereas lower resolution monitor users have to proactively enable this. Monitor resolution has nothing to do with fundamental content issues. If you're not seeing issues that are visibly present on a smaller screen with less pixels but is using the same game settings, then you are admitting to an inferior viewing experience and compromising your judgment in the name of blindness. John was the most tactful when addressing the subject, and acknowledging that people focus on different things like lighting or anti-aliasing. But I call that a difference in standards. If you have low standards that are founded on complacency, then I think you'll have your mind blown when quality is delivered properly. I told hundreds of people who use DLSS 3 that they were using the blurriest method on the market, but Nvidia shills told me to shut up and that it was God's gift to image stability. After I had embarrassed Nvidia so aggressively with half-competent anti-aliasing comparisons, Nvidia rolled out improvements with DLSS 4. And now all those same people swearing to God that DLSS 3 was peak image quality are all now talking about how they don't understand how they were using such a blurry technique beforehand. So if you like the garbage content being produced now, then you're in for a great ride when these issues I'm pointing out are eventually fixed. Alex Battaglia then joined the conversation, but not to actually argue about the claims being made about the industry. Instead he claimed that videos like mine have an angle to make an online profit. First of all, this is a red herring fallacy. The name of this fallacy originates from a technique used in fox hunts, where one team would utilize the strong odor of a dead fish to distract the tracking hounds of the opposing team. Alex's stinking worthless fish was thrown as he said, "The grift is real," as he shamefully looked down away from the camera. Richard then repeated this line in agreement, and my thanks goes out to John for quickly trying to defuse the absolute hypocrisy of his colleagues attacking YouTube profiting. Because Digital Foundry is a money-making machine that milks YouTube's system, which favors upload frequency rather than quality. These 7 dudes are making articles that draw in ads and pump out videos daily, with multiple videos on the same topic. To milk the following they have, they publish hour-long talks weekly and then profit on that video again with DF clips. All of this funnels into their Patreon. From the last 30 days, March 1st, 2025, DF pulled in at least $20,000 from these 3 platforms, and that's not including sponsorships and web ad revenue. So in the middle of producing one of these videos, Alex is criticizing profit angles. I don't know about other YouTubers, but it takes me weeks to produce this content. I consult with advanced engineers and write up content that contains digestible education for both consumers and developers. My team is also working on a proprietary plan to get our goals funded without the need for crowdfunding. I've had to give away equity of my company to my employees because we can't survive on YouTube revenue alone. I barely promote my merch, yet the only thing I ask viewers to do is watch and share our content. After this pointless, poorly received clip was shared for a second time on DF Clips, I became aware of another video by Battaglia that was the equivalent of telling me, "Here's my coffin. Here's a nail, and all I needed to do is hit it with a hammer." Alex butchers his so-called journalism with angles based on whether or not he can get an interview with a studio that produces the game he reviews. He is not getting an interview with the Monster Hunter Wilds devs, so there's no point in pretending the title is more technically advanced than it actually is, something I called him out for doing in my Alan Wake 2 analysis video. Alex could not paint over the obvious criticisms people are rightfully giving this game, and he finally delivers criticisms people have only found in my videos such as PS3-like, but he pairs them with defensive and self-nurturing comments designed to advocate for his years of experience. 3 cringy times he directs viewers' attention to his so-called competence. He's been with DF for 7 years and my comments are causing this much insecurity. But guess what? Alex gave what I consider basic criticism to a game that everyone already knew was trash. He took the ugliest game he could find to prove to everyone watching he has what it takes to give harsh criticism. He's done this before with titles like Starfield, where he mostly copied other people's criticisms. He completely ended up exposing his bias because the criticisms he gave Monster Hunter Wilds were criticisms I expected DF to call out in better looking titles. He hones in on the poor texture quality in Monster Hunter Wilds, calling it PS3-like, yet he should have said the same thing about the Indiana Jones games, but he was too busy interviewing machine games with his Nvidia babysitter. His Alan Wake 2 analysis never showed the issues I mentioned because he was too busy interviewing Remedy Entertainment. Alex states that these issues can get patched out, which rarely solve core development issues like this, and he slams the performance drops found during the camera panning. But let's remember that the Spider-Man 2 port from Nixie suffers from the same problem. Yet, Alex makes special concessions during a video about all the issues present in the port and says that it wouldn't be beneficial to consumers to point them out since Nixies would patch them out. The fact that he considers his basic ratchet and click analysis harsh also shows his sensitivity when poking at studios he interviews. While Nixies is very good about accessibility, the performance of their titles and the recent awakening of upscaling culture has been more than extremely disappointing, which explains why on X/Twitter one of their employees attacked our channel. Ask yourself who Digital Foundry values more, viewers or the studios they work with, the studios that are ripping you off. My overall issue with Digital Foundry is that they cultivate a culture of ignorance that is based on blind guessing, which negatively influences the market of both developers and gamers. Let's go back to that first Digital Foundry clip I mentioned. The first thing Richard says is, "What can I say? From my perspective," and he basically goes into, "Let's guess about X." They constantly make assumptions on why X behaves this way or why Z performs that way. A perfect example of this is Alex's Alan Wake 2 coverage where he defends poor performance with casual guessing he just makes up, such as imaginary RTGI, versus my video which actually explains in great detail why performance is demanding by showing the exact data. Another example is when Richard assumed checkerboard rendering was in use on the PS5 Days Gone port because hair in motion showed checkerboard patterns, when anyone who knows basic shader capabilities knows that that appearance could be the result of a dithered shader applied to it. Alex did something similar in his TAA video when he displayed dithered hair while mentioning low resolution rendering for TAA abuse. Hair is not an effect that can be ran at a lower resolution because it's geometry based. Only effects with dedicated buffers in the pipeline can be ran at a low resolution, unless you want to discuss VRS shading, which allows these to have independent temporal smoothing. Many games just have dither shaders applied to geometry to abuse flawed TAA behavior. Alex pulled out the random buzzword BVH quality to explain why foliage isn't evaluated in Ratchet & Clank's ray tracing. BVH is just help categorize objects in a more optimized way for ray tracing performance. If you watch my Alan Wake 2 analysis, you'll understand why foliage usually adds a costly evaluation step for ray tracing. Digital Foundry also spoon-feeds marketing narratives for manipulative developers. Thomas Morgan collaborated with the developers of Black Ops 6 to showcase the PS5 improvements, but one of Thomas's comments stated that PSSR was introducing flickering artifacts because unlike the engine's default TAA, it's not tuned to denoise the output. So viewers of that video go off thinking that this is acceptable development, when in reality only blurry or expensive flawed TAA can denoise what many, including myself, consider incomplete and neglected rendering aspects. PSSR is too accumulative, allowing it to hold poor hair rendering well enough, but it's more aggressive in preventing poor temporal motion behavior. This in turn makes it a more visually competent solution that can't be abused as much as their fully incompetent engine TAA. The constantly pushed narrative behind TAA's so-called optimizing performance is that it's going to remove parts of the graphic pipeline for TAA to replace for free. This ends up freeing up the GPU time, hence more FPS. But let's get out of fairy tale land and understand that FPS counters don't mean squat. Nothing here was optimized because this dude just made the graphics look 100 times worse because only blurry, smeary, and competently designed TAA can only somewhat smooth these graphic aspects. Now that these new problems exist, developers are focusing on advanced TAA, which retains that overaccumulative behavior because our pipelines now depend on it, and are utilizing AI or overcomplicated logic to reduce, again, not even eliminate, to only reduce the accumulation issues at a cost that ends up being more than most of these aspects combined. So what's the solution? Well, it could cost these studios more money, but if you analyze the original pipeline, you'll usually find extreme performance neglect elsewhere. It could be large amounts of processing for geometry that never shows up in the buffer it's called to. It could be overly dense geometry, a material that is needlessly killing performance. It could be crappy pre-passing logic. It could be that the AO algorithm is slower than the better existing version, but not the blur pass. It could be GPU animation processing, or GPU simulations that don't need to exist. It could be dynamic GI in a game with a static environment. We have all seen these things in my analysis videos. Notice that many of these cannot be fixed with flawed TAA, and most of these kill off GPU performance much faster than the graphic aspects being sacrificed today. This is fake optimization in modern games. A lot of people accuse me of randomly going after Alex Battaglia without properly reaching out to Digital Foundry as a whole, and we need to go back months ago to get proper context. Months before our first video when I first found out about the TAA abuse situation, and after I had realized a lot of developers and people just didn't understand how grave the situation was, I made it a goal to get more developer awareness, and I began advocating for fixing the issues. I successfully gained the most developer votes on the Unreal forums, and I found very small online communities discussing this. The problem with these communities is that they were not growing at a fast pace, and professional developers found them rightfully profane. So I eventually suggested to these communities to create developer resource flares, which you'll find on numerous subreddits thanks to me, because advertising information to developers would be a lot more impactful than what used to be referred to as ignorant gamer complaints. After I had brought a lot of legitimacy to the developer discussions and created booming recognition of these subreddits, Alex Battaglia made a tweet insulting one of these subreddits in a condescending tone where he outright mocked people who had issues with flawed TAA, invalidating the problems we discussed because most people can't match his elitist display choice. It's funny because Steve is now talking about the issue and understands completely why such a profane name was taken for one of these subreddits. So I created the TAA abuse video in retaliation? No, I was already working on the video. Then Alex approached the community with a pompous attempt at damage control, and stated that he was going to make a video on TAA. He put on a facade that he truly cared and asked the community to explain their positions on the topic. That was when I reached out to Alex with warnings on how he should produce the video, and how his studio is damaging the industry with misleading comparisons. Well, he produced that video, and opened it with a condescending, well, guess what? TAA is here to stay for the foreseeable future, regardless of what you think. Followed by the exact things I stated not to do in the video. I stated he should not be derogatory, and that they needed to cover independent shader AA, and not blindly promote NVIDIA anti-aliasing under disingenuous conditions, along with numerous issues I could make a whole separate video on. So yes, I called him out in the production of my video. That's why he quickly decided to try to discredit the facts I revealed. But let it be known, Alex fired blind shots in the dark twice, thinking whatever he'd hit wouldn't come out to teach him a lesson. I don't hate Alex or Digital Foundry, but you should unsubscribe from them because their low quality content culminates in building a culture of ignorance, which contends with our goal in creating a new and improved paradigm in which consumers know and understand the inner workings of the games they consider buying. I am trying to demystify it and encourage solutions for the future of gaming. People often quote Digital Foundry and create a gullible appearance of consumers. The modern development industry has detected this ignorance and will continue to abuse it until consumers make the shift towards the awareness we offer them. Digital Foundry and everyone else seething at this channel's success will only defend themselves with irrelevant fallacies. Let's go through them one by one, shall we? He's too young, he hasn't shipped a game yet, they hate him on Reddit. That is the ad hominem fallacy in which my character or credentials are attacked. He's unfair to other YouTubers, he's mean, he's harsh, I don't like his tone. All of which fall under ad hominem or red herring, in which someone against me brings up an irrelevant topic in an effort to discredit the facts I have stated. And we'll predict the next ones. But give Digital Foundry a break. They're not even developers. It's not their fault if they were lied to by companies like Epic Games. And, while I'd rather put my trust in Digital Foundry, they've been around longer. The first two are examples of ad misericordium, the appeal to pity fallacy. And the last one is an appeal to celebrity. The thing is if I'm right about something, I'm right. Even if you don't like my tone, or think I'm harsh, or just don't like me for some reason, none of those things make me any less right. The truth is the truth, it's bigger than me, it's bigger than Threat Interactive, and it belongs to the world. Consumers deserve to have access to it, should they seek it out, and that is why we are here. Thank you so much for your continued viewership and support.